Thanks very much, Anna, for the introduction, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Patrick Bozay. So let's talk about the soybean insect pest. So, of course, soybean aphid is the number one pest that we have in North Dakota, and it's primarily due to its reproductive strategy. It reproduces very fast by giving birth to live young, and in the summer, when we're growing our crop, they're all females. So they can reproduce very fast. It's called exponential reproduction rate and parthenogenesis. So, and when the populations are economic, it can reduce soybean yield 50 to 60%. They overwinter as eggs on buckthorn. And it's interesting to note that buckthorn originated in Asia, just like the soybean aphid. So now that the aphids here, we have plenty of host for the soybean aphid to overwinter on. We can do a winter mortality forecast on the survival of soybean aphid eggs, and with Anthony Hansen at the University of Minnesota, we did one for Minnesota and North Dakota. And the eggs will freeze when we have temperatures at minus 25 to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So we can get a lot of, winter kill in the winter due to our extreme winters. And as you can see, the Ritter Valley had the most survival, 5 to 25% egg mortality. And as you move westward throughout the state, all the way out west, it got up to 95%. So that doesn't mean that you're not going to have soybean aphids, because they're excellent migrators and they can fly 100 miles on the wind currents. So all those states to the south, South Dakota, southern Minnesota, Iowa, they all have soybean aphid as well. So just because we had a super cold winter doesn't mean that they'll get to the state later on. So I'm not going to cover scouting. We've done that plenty times before, and getting it right, soybean. So you can go to this video if you're interested in seeing a short scouting video for soybean aphid. For the populations we saw this year, you can see it started out like we're having quite a few aphids in the field, especially in the eastern part of the state in the Red River Valley. And then it continued throughout the season, but then the weather changed and we had a very cold spring. It was wet and cold, and then had several thunderstorms, high humidity. So the populations collapsed in the southeast region. And then if we look at the map on the right side, we had the most economic soybean aphid populations up in the northeast, and they did have to do some spraying up there. And out in the west, you guys had a lot of mortality, so I guess that one panned out. But there were a few aphids, and you can see they're getting all the way out now into western North Dakota. Just a little refresher. We all know what the aphid threshold is. It's an average of 250 aphids per plant, and 80% of the plants infested as the populations increase. And this is good for the vegetative through the R5 stage. As we get to the R6 stage, it gets a little more gray. Entomologists know that the threshold goes up. But there's another biological event happening with the soybean aphid at that time. It's usually late summer into fall, and the aphids are going to be starting to change their physiology to moving back to the overwintering host. So they're going to be starting to move out of the field, so it really complicates spray decisions, and usually it's not going to be economical at this stage. Now, we do have pyrethroid resistant soybean aphids. It's very prevalent, especially in the eastern part of the state. And again, we can manage this. First, you just need to know your pest, its biology, and scout those fields regularly. And then, use the thresholds. They're developed with years of research from multiple states and a variety of different situations. So we just need to prevent, using those insecticides, only when necessary, and conserve those natural enemies which are out there working for us and controlling soybean aphid. So the chemical companies support this strongly. They really like the insecticide resistant management approach. Again, the main thing is rotate your mode of action or insecticide class, especially if you're using more than one application in a field season. Don't use the same material year after year. Try to get out of that whole class of insecticide if you're spraying pyrethroids, warrior, Asana and other pyrethroids, change to a different class completely to mix it up and prevent resistance development. Some of the newer modes of action for soybean aphid, which you're all familiar with, is Transform WG, Savanto Prime, and Safina. And we already have some complaints with Transform WG maybe not providing as good control as we thought, and we got some complaints on Ridgeback. I'm not saying they're resistant, but we don't know because we haven't ran any bioassays. But if we practice this insecticide resistant management, this will help prevent further development of resistance to new products. Bean leaf beetle is one I want to spend a little bit of time on. We have this one is becoming more common in North Dakota, so we need to be aware of it and how to manage it properly. The adults overwinter in debris, usually in tree shelter belts. They're very small, 1/4 inch long, and you'll see there's two different colors. You can have a yellowish green one and a red one. It's easy to identify though, because you can see the black triangle behind the head and the prothorax. And that's black triangle is how you identify it. Most of them have 4 spots, but you also see some of the beetles don't have any spots. So be sure you can recognize all different forms of this beetle. The larvae you're not going to see, it's down in the soil. It's about 1/3 inch long when mature, has it's whitish cream color, has a brown head and a anal plate. And the other life stages are all in the soil, egg, larvae, and pupae. So you won't see them unless you're digging around in the dirt. Here's our IPM crop survey maps that we have for soybean bean leaf beetle. The one on the left is from 2021 to 2024. And I just want you to note how widespread it is. It used to be only found along the South Dakota border over in the southeast of North Dakota. Now you can find it clear up to the Canadian border and just about all the way out west. So it's really expanded in the last 15, 20 years. And the map on the right is from 2025, and you can see we did have a few hot spots with bean leaf beetle this last year in central part of the state, and I'm sure there's more that we're not aware of. I don't really like this life cycle chart of bean leaf beetle, but it's the only one I could find from Purdue University, so I modified it a bit for North Dakota. We typically will just see 2 generations a year here. And then the overwintering, they have 3 different times the beetles come out. So that's when you need to be, concerned and scouting for them. But the adult beetle is long lived, so they can live 30 to 40 days. So they're kind of continuous throughout the whole year. You need to be looking for them from May to September. So we have the overwintering generation that comes up when the temperatures warm up to 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll come up and they'll move to the clover and alfalfa and feed on that. And then when the soybeans get planted and emerge, they'll move over to the soybeans. The female can lay up to 130 to 200 eggs, and they usually lay them in clusters into the soil near the base of the plant, the soybean plant. And then the eggs will hatch into larvae, and they'll feed on the roots and the root nodules for about 3 to 6 weeks. And then it goes through a short pupal stage, which takes about 1 week. And then the adult will emerge from that puparium. So the stars indicate when each generation starts. First we have that overwintering one in May when that beetle will come out. Then usually early July to mid-July, depending on how warm it is. The first generation comes out, and then usually late August, that third one comes out. So it has a kind of a long life cycle. Okay, for crop damage, the beetle has chewing mouth parts, and it's going to feed on your foliage and your pods. They have a characteristic feeding. You can see the lower right picture. They have nice little circular holes, and you can actually identify bean leaf beetle by these circular holes. They're very hard to see sometimes in the field because they're very secretive, and they'll drop down to the soil and run when they see you coming or hide in some of the cracks of the soil. But this reduces the photosynthetic area of the leaves, so it doesn't produce as much food for the plant and can affect plant health. In the seedling stage for that overwintering beetle, they will stunt the plants and also feed on the growing point, which can cause plant death. The larvae does feed on the nitrogen-fixing nodules and roots, but in general, it doesn't cause as much, economic damage compared to the adult. So they can also chew on your pods, and this is not good because it can vector a virus, the bean pod mottle virus. In fact, the beetles, if they're infected when they go into overwintering in the fall, they can carry that over into the spring. So then when they emerge, they will be carrying that virus. The entry holes they provide in the pods is an entry point for other pathogens to get in and develop. And it can also reduce your seed quality, so that seed's going to become discolored and shriveled up and also moldy looking. And you can see some of the virus symptoms in the bottom picture there, the leaf mottling and the yellowing, which you could confuse with iron chlorosis. And then for crop damage, for the bean pod mottle virus in seed, it can reduce yield 3 to 52%, depending on the cultivar and the time of the infection. If the infection occurs earlier in the season, it's going to be more severe on the plant, and you'll have a higher percent yield loss. Also, it increases the risk of Phomopsis seed infection. And this is a big concern for growers who are growing soybeans for food grade or seed production. So it can be a big concern. You can see how discolored the seed is from the virus under B. So there are some thresholds we have for bean leaf beetle to help you make management decisions. And the early feeding from that overwintering generation on the seedling stage is most concerning. So if you have 5 or more bean leaf beetles per foot of row, that would be considered a threshold where you need to take some sort of management action, or 1 damaged plant per foot of row. And we primarily control the bean leaf beetle, the overwintering generation, through the use of insecticide seed treatments, and they have been effective to date. For the other generations, once you get past the seedling stage to pre-bloom, we use defoliation, 30% defoliation. Or there has been some states that use a count, 10 or more being leaf beetles per foot of row. Once you move further on, the crop gets more developed from bloom, R1 to early seed, R5. Then it goes down to 20% defoliation and stays the same, 10 or more being leaf beetle per foot of row. And then also you have pods present then later on. So you might see, some pod injury, and that's only 10%. And if you do see they're clipping the pods, the bean leaf beetle will feed at the base of those pod stems and clip them off. So if you do see that, you need to be very aggressive and treat. Full seed, R6 to maturity, it goes up because the plant can tolerate more damage than 30% defoliation. And usually it's not justified to treat at this stage, just like soybean aphid. We have run some insecticide trials for bean leaf beetle. And we tested a bunch of premixes here, Renesta, Hero, Indigo ZC, Ridgeback, and we compared them to a Pyrethroid, Warrior 2. And you can see here the untreated check on the left, and the blue bar is the pre-count for, prior to spraying. You can see we had, bean leaf beetles throughout the plots, and then all of the insecticides worked, and all of the premixes were comparable to our standard Pyrethroid Warrior 2. So I got excellent control with all of the insecticides. So just to bring to your attention a couple of new insect pests, soybean gall midge and the Cetomyidae insect family. It's very small, cryptic fly, kind of nondescript. You're unlikely to see it in the field when you're out scouting because it's very short-lived, 4 days or more. They have 2 generations or more per year, and they typically will infest just the field edges. Here's the current map of the distribution. We've have a multi-state project where we've been surveying for this for several years. And right now it's found in 7 states and 185 counties. In North Dakota, you can see it was found in Sargent County near Gwinner in 2022. And then we're bordered on the eastern side there of Richland County and the South Dakota border. We bordered with soybean gall midge infested counties, so we are very concerned with it becoming more common in North Dakota. So they can cause yield loss, and early on they can reduce plant stand and kill the plants, and also reduce the number of pods and seed. And on the field edges in Nebraska, where they had severe pressures from soybean gall midge, you can see they had no yield all the way out 50 feet from the field edge. And then as they walked further into the field, it increased, but it was still below the historical average. And we don't want that to happen in North Dakota. Get a high number of midge. They're difficult to control. So I'd like you to look for midge for me. If you can walk the field edges and look for a darkened base near the soil level on the stem. And then if you do see that, pull the plant up and peel back the outer epidermis and look for the orange or white colored larvae. If you find it, we need to preserve it in a ethanol vial or some sort of rubbing alcohol is fine. Put about 20 or more larvae in there if you can find them, and then send them in for DNA sequencing, because we use DNA to determine which species it is, because there's more than one midge in North Dakota, and they're very difficult to identify by physical characteristics. So another new one is the soybean tentiform leaf miner. It's fairly widespread now in eastern North America and native to North America, and some of its native hosts are American hog peanut and sickle seed fuzzy bean. So this particular insect we feel has just moved over into soybean from these native hosts. It's super tiny. It's a microlepidopteran, and it's only about the size of the nose on of Washington on the quarter, so a quarter of an inch or less, and beautiful though if when you magnify it, orange, white. And it's a leaf miner, so it's going to mine the leaves between the two upper and lower epidermis. And at the beginning, they start out as a serpentine, and then it goes to a blotch mine, and then a tentiform mine. So you can see it kind of looks like a tent on the upper surface, and then on the lower surface, it's more of a blotch. But they're very characteristic when you find it, and it's most certainly soybean tentiform leaf miner. Right now, it's found in 6 states and 76 counties, and we have it in 12 counties in North Dakota, in the southeast and the west central and southeast region. So it does look like it's probably been here, but we're just finding it. So Dr. Bob Koch, University of Minnesota, has done some research on it, and he found that most of the leaf miners were found in the field edges on fields with trees. And that would be the diagrams on the right. On the left, you see where they had no trees, they did not find it as much. So it is an edge-affecting species and prefers fields with trees. And he did some chemical control, and he found that earlier mines, the serpentine and the blotch, were susceptible to agramec and indigo, which are translaminar insecticides. But once it got to the tentiform stage, it wasn't available. So and they did host range. It's very specific to soybean and wasn't found on any other crops that were tested, pulse crops and dry beans. We do have a new insecticide. I'll just end with that. Coming from Syngenta Vertendo. It's penicillin technology isocycloserum. It's a group 30. So we're very excited to have it. Bean leaf beetles on there, and we have tested it in the field with penicillin, and it worked excellent against bean leaf beetle. Some of our worms, caterpillars, clover worm, green clover worm are also on that. And we don't really have many stink bugs, but they're out there, but not economic. Spider mites, potato leafhopper. It is sensitive though to the bees, so up to 3 hours after spraying, so be sure you're very careful if you use it during pollination of crops. And here's some resources available. We'll be coming out with a 2026 North Dakota Field Crop Insect Management Guide, and that will have the new penicillin labels in it. There's other labels for other crops as well. So thank you so much for listening and sharing your time.